Well, I can't avoid it any longer. It's time to talk about that election.
These are the quiet Australians who have won a great victory tonight.
Oh my God. So back in March, I bought tickets from Melbourne to Buenos Aires, Argentina, with my flight departing at noon on May 18th. Of course, a couple of weeks later, they announced that the election was going to be on May 18th. Cool. Now I, of course, still managed to get an early vote in like a good law-abiding citizen who is definitely not a communist. So election day and the day of my flight finally comes around. I board my flight from Melbourne to Santiago in Chile at around 11 AM I think it was, and then I find out that it's one of those weird Wi-Fi-less flights from the last century. 14 hours of no contact with anything outside of this plane on election day. It was torture. So once I finally land, I'm extremely tired, but I still managed to somehow find the energy to go on a hunt for Wi-Fi so that I could see the results of the election. And yeah, I needed Wi-Fi because I am not going to pay whatever it costs for roaming. And whatever it is, I'm probably too poor to afford it anyway. Now, as usual, the free airport Wi-Fi was total garbage, so I spent easily 30 to 45 minutes just walking back and forth in the terminal. I think I covered maybe 3 or 4 kilometers, trying to find a spot where the connection was at least strong enough to update my Twitter feed or something. I never actually found it, mind you, but by some miracle, Twitter managed to connect for just long enough to send me a notification about some random tweet on my feed. It told me pretty much everything I needed to know. It just said, "F you, Australia." I felt very secure in my decision to immigrate in that moment. So in case you've gotten this far without reading the title of this video or realizing what I'm on about up to this point, which would honestly be kind of impressive, that "F you" was in response to Australia re-electing one of its worst governments of the modern era. Really, they're just a complete mess. 3 prime ministers in 6 years, a plethora of bombshell scandals and corruption allegations, a destructive, reality-denying, public service-destroying conservative agenda, about 8 billion consecutive news poll losses, and running on the slogan of jobs and growth despite objectively having the worst economic performance of any Australian government since the 70s. That is who we voted for. How the f did this happen? Ask any young liberal or some other dumb shit and they'll tell you it's all because those inner city greeny lefty elites are out of touch with the true Aussie battlers. They love coal, they drive utes, and they hate the gender ideology of those dastardly Labour communists, the silent majority. Now there's going to be some of these very people saying this same thing in the comments of this video and pretty much disliking the video in the first 5 seconds, so smash that like button to counter them. All that you need to do to disprove this ridiculous notion that true, regular Aussie working class battlers, or Trawsibs for short, love the Liberals and hate Labour, is to look at who the Liberals actually are. A bunch of sheltered old men, born into riches, who never learned how to interact with normal people. People who aren't in touch with anyone with less than a couple million in their bank account, regardless of how much they insist they represent a silent majority of working Australians. I mean, just look at these damn people.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, how are you? No, I'm Korean.
Good morning, sir. How are you? Oh, really? Very good. Oh, wow.
If that's not enough, you could just take a quick look at their policies. Oh, wait, they didn't have any. Oh, wait, sorry, that's not fair. They did have a couple of policies like the other guy has a bad, and have some tax cuts, and that is about it. And those tax cuts don't even remotely cover what we're all going to be losing from the cuts to government spending that they inevitably are going to require. Unless, of course, you're an elite rich who doesn't need any government services ever, which is who the tax cuts are actually for. Because in the long term, they cost the government a ridiculous amount of potential spending money, meaning that public services are going to be decimated, and everyone who isn't a rich bastard is pretty much just going to be screwed over. Yay. But wait, the coalition made sure to put some scraps in there for some of the rest of us. Enough to save people earning between $45,000 and $200,000 a year a whopping $1,000 a year on average. Enough to pay for, say, 1 month of private health insurance for a single person. Wow. And those people took the bait. You see, Australia is a country where only about 30% of people are classified as low income or poor, according to OECD figures. That means that this election was not decided by the 30% of poor Australians, but the 70% who are middle class at worst. And who's in government matters much less for middle class people than it does for poor people. They're pretty much just always going to be fairly well off. So they're just not very invested in politics as a result of this comfort. which is probably why the average Australian is so ludicrously politically complacent, which is something that I personally never really noticed until I'd actually lived in other countries to give me a point of comparison. Seriously, the average Australian protest is something like 15 people getting Swanston Street closed down for the morning, while John Smith, who I imagine looks something like this, tweets that he now has no choice but to become a climate change denier because they made him 5 minutes late to work. When that's your average voter, is it really so much of a surprise that they were sucked in by, well, this fella?
Prime Minister, you're on the bus tour.
Yeah.
Why are you flying?
Well, the bus is going all the way up to Rocky, and then it's and that's where it was always planning to go. I mean, it's a big state.
Then why have the bus?
Because it gets me from A to B.
Will you be taking the bus to Rockhampton from here?
Yes, the bus will be going to Rockhampton from here. That's right. I've got to get there earlier than the bus tonight.
So you'll be flying to Rockhampton?
I'll get into Rockhampton tonight, and I've got a program tonight in Rockhampton. The bus can't get me there quick enough, so I've got to fly.
You'll be flying to Rockhampton, the bus will catch up with you, and then you'll fly on to Townsville?
I'll be flying on to Townsville, and your point is what?
I'm just interested in the point of the bus if you're not on it.
I am on it, I just got off it.
With the simple promise that they'd save like 3 days to a week of wages on taxes, ignore the coalition's attempts to slowly but surely privatise Medicare, please. Now, you might have noticed that I haven't actually really talked about the Labor Party in this video up until about, well, right now. That was intentional, because the issue here isn't that they're especially good and deserve to be elected or anything like that, no. It's that the coalition have been so bad that they really should have lost to, well, basically anything. Despite that though, Labor did have a fairly complete policy agenda that they laid out pretty transparently. Now, I hardly think it was incredible or anything, as they certainly suck shit when it comes to refugees, Adani, climate change in general, and definitely didn't go nearly far enough in other areas either. But they did at least hit some decent notes and consciously tried to target poor Australian voters with their rhetoric. Meanwhile, the coalition campaigned on little more than Labor bad, without offering anything but regression themselves. Incredibly uninspiring and really just downright insulting to our intelligence. But it still worked. So yeah, Australia's problem here is really just one of it being a small, advanced economy under capitalism. The majority have been made quite comfortable by these social programs instituted over the last half a century or so. But they don't really care about how or why they got to where they are, because they've been placated to the point where the capitalists can do pretty much anything they want with them and get away with it. They didn't vote for the party that tried to appeal to poor people because, well, on average they're complacent, selfish, and not poor themselves. And it certainly doesn't help that the coalition is lying and telling them, with the enthusiastic support of most of the country's media, thanks old melting ghoul man, that voting Labor would be some sort of apocalyptic disaster for them. This also explains Labor's complete capitulation of the coalition on practically everything since the election. They have supported their tax cuts, voted to hand Peter f***ing Dutton more power to surveil and detain us, and the new supposedly left faction Labor Party leader, Anthony Albanese, has come out as pro-Adani, and that's just the start. Their interest isn't so much in serving Australians, like, you know, politicians are kind of supposed to actually do, but more in just winning elections in whatever way possible. They tried the mildly populist thing with some actual decent policies thrown in there, and still managed to miss an empty net. Gutless and with no convictions to speak of, they've since decided that adopting the anti-politics of the coalition will get them votes from the majority of comfortable, politically unengaged Australians. There's really no winners here, except for rich bastards. And the 30% of poor Australians who needed at least a centre-left government to come in and actually do some stuff for them for once are set to lose out the most. And the entire human race also loses out really, since, well, Australia now has a two-party system with two major parties who are both committed to doing absolutely nothing of worth on climate change. Don't expect any international leadership or cooperation from us in this time where international leadership and cooperation are literally required to save the world. I love it when my kids burn to death in ambient summer temperatures. So yeah, that's my assessment of what happened with the election. Very negative, I know, but I don't know how to be positive about something like this, especially with the added gut punch of the supposed opposition turning into straight up Tory collaborators. So now we've got a two-party system with two Liberal parties, which is best understood as fucking hell. There is one thing that I can be positive about though, that I'm not in Australia anymore. Thanks for watching folks. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell. If you really like my videos, consider supporting me on Patreon, which comes with some special rewards, such as having your name appear in these here credits. Or you could also consider sending me a one-time donation via Ko-fi. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank all of my patrons and especially my $5 and up supporters. Leftist Tech Support, Inga Leonora, Kira B, Tija, The Antifada, BJ Hansen, Daniel S, Diego A. Salvati, Lee Karatash Gullit, Key to the Fields, Alejandro, Matatesta, Industrial Robot, and Jamie the Commie. See you guys next time.